I'm the Tech Transfer Program Lead, and I will be talking today about the services that we'll be providing through the Tech Transfer Program in 2020. So there's two main services, is the Integrated Hive Management Program and an IPM training. So just to kind of give an overview of the Alberta Tech Transfer Program, there's other provinces that have a tech transfer program, and each province kind of have a slightly different kind of program. In Alberta, it's basically divided into three sections. We have an applied research kind of area. We'll do work on disease and pest management, and also training and workshops. These two, disease, pest management, training, kind of overlap, and I will show in this presentation how kind of it will overlap these two sections a bit. So to start with the applied research, we have one project on the plan for 2020, which is the mass storage of queens in banks over winter. If you were here for Breeders' Day on Monday, I presented on this project. So the plan is to start this project in winter of 2020 to 2021. So we'll start in September, and it's a project to store queens, summer-mated queens, in banks over the winter indoor. In Alberta, it will be indoors, yes. So I'll kind of run a little bit just to summarize a bit of the project, but my focus will be on the other two sections, the disease management and the training, just for this talk today. So this will be a project in collaboration with Dr. Shelley Hoover. We will test and adapt previous published methods to our winter season, to the weather, and here in Alberta. So these methodology to overwinter queens in banks have been used and designed by other groups as well. So in Quebec and Ontario and BC, there has been projects on this subject already, and very successful. So we don't want to be left out. We want to also try that in Alberta and see how we can overwinter queens here in Alberta indoors. This is mainly important because early in the year, in early April, there's not enough local queen supply here in Alberta. And that's the time of the year that you really want queens. If you want your colonies to be strong by early summer so you can take them to pollination or produce a good amount of honey, that's when you want your colonies to start requeening or splitting or replacing the dead outs. And there's not enough supply of local, if any, of local queens. So if we can bank these queens, summer-mated queens, and bank them over the winter, then we can have queens available early in spring. We'll be doing two overwintering locations, one more in the central Alberta and one in southern Alberta, and 3 to 4 banks per location with 40 queens inside of each bank. So these will be kept indoors at about 15 degrees temperature, the overwintering room. So now I'll kind of switch to the main focus of this talk, which is disease pest management. So you all heard and you all know the many pests that we deal with. Sorry, you have a question, sir?
The queens that you're banking, are they virgin or mated?
Mated queens, yeah, some are mated. They will be mated. The beekeeper will rear these queens in the summer. They will mate, will cage them, and bank them over the winter. So they'll be mated. Okay, so we have many diseases in a colony, tons that beekeepers have to deal with on a daily basis. So One of the plans and the services that we'll be providing through the tech transfer program is a sampling schedule and protocol for these integrated hive management programs. So monitoring the colony for pests and diseases. I'll kind of just a little bit of a summary of what an integrative hive management program is. And you kind of heard already this throughout the day yesterday a little bit. So you start with an education. You have to educate yourself. You have to be able to identify the disease in the field, to know what that is, and then know what's your next step, what you do after. The second step is monitoring, and we heard this many times yesterday and just right now. You have to monitor. You have to know your enemies. You have to know what you have, so you know what your next step is. 3 is your best management practices, IPM strategies. So this is usually in the spring where you monitor. This usually happens in the summer. And then you have to do a disease pest evaluation. And that usually happens in the fall. And it's, again, kind of the same thing, a monitoring, where you're going to evaluate what's your disease level. And then you go back again, education. You have to get updated every year on new techniques, new emerging disease, exotic pests, and things like this. So the cycle always repeats every year, kind of thing. So, like I said, the integrated hive management overlaps with training, right? So here is the first step, and this is how we want to support that step, the education. So we'll be providing on-site training for bee pest and disease identification and management. So this will be on-site training. So we'll be going to the Beekeepers operation and providing that IPM training. And this is a little bit how this will look like. It will be small groups. So if the beekeeper has 30 technicians, I will ask him or her for us to divide that in 2 days. So it's just easier. You have a better time with each person. You get to train that person better if it's a smaller groups than in a huge crowd like this. So we'll have small groups in these trainings. Well, like I said, it's an IPM training, so bee pests and disease. And we'll provide with this training the Kappa honeybee pest and disease book. And these we have Spanish and English. We actually have French as well, but I only know of one French Canadian beekeeper, bee technician here in Alberta. There might be more, I don't know all of you guys, but we also have the French. So these will be provided as well. So the technician can have with him or her in the field or just at the honey house or in the break room. This is a little bit of how I plan to set the agenda for this training. We can change a little bit, but this is just kind of how I plan that this training will be. We'll start with some very basic, just the IPM principles, basic honeybee biology, and this is important because a lot of the diseases have to do with the larval stage and things like this, the development, so it's important for them to simply have an idea of what that is. So just basic honeybee biology. Then we'll move on to diseases, of course, and the parasites, pests, and IPM strategies and plan. The cost for this, so this is just an estimate, so the cost will be distance dependent because it will change mileage, or if we have to stay overnight and things like this, depending on where you're located. So this is just kind of an estimate that I came up with, but what I want to is that if you are interested on this service, please contact me directly and we will work on the costs together, because I will need to know your location and things like this, how many people you have, how many days that will be necessary. So this is just an estimate on how much that will cost. There will be a number, the capped for a number of courses, because I'm only one, and will be a good. This is the first year too of the service, so it will be good to kind of have an idea on what the demand is and what we don't. If we don't get to go to your operation the first year, we can go the second year. So there will be a cap on the number of courses that we can provide. And you will register for this online, but please contact me directly first, and so we can work out on the details. But to register for this program will be online. This is the Alberta Beekeepers Commission website, and there will be a link. It's not yet on, but we will launch the tech transfer program web page in the Alberta Beekeepers Commission website soon. So you will click on the TTP link, and there you will find this option to register for the IPM training. So step number 2, monitoring. So like I said, these can be done sampling, know your enemies, and it's very similar to in the fall. You also sample in the fall to have an idea on pests and disease that you have in the colony before the winter. So we'll be doing, providing the colony health monitors, sampling, in the spring and fall. And so how will this work? This is very, very similar to what Patricia just presented. This is actually a mirror of the National Health Survey. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, so we will use very similar methodology that they have used. It's standardized and it works. So we'll be collecting samples, and there will be a few options, a couple options, but the main option is to collect for Nosema, Varroa, AFB, EFB, and 3 different viruses. And that to be done both in the spring and in the fall. So 2 times in the year, right after the winter, when the beginning of your season, and at the end before the winter. So 2 very important times in the beekeeping season. So just to evaluate and monitor the hives. Now, before I tell you how much it costs, I'll tell you the benefit of monitoring for colony health, right? You have an unhealthy hive and you have a healthy hive. And you beekeepers, you know that an unhealthy hive does not perform well, has lower population size, so it will produce less than a healthy hive, and will also have a lower overwinter success. So we're talking dollars here as well, right? So if it doesn't perform well, it doesn't produce much, it doesn't overwinter well, that will cost you money. So there's big dollar signs there for having an unhealthy hive. And if you were here for Pullman's talk yesterday, he said one of his most efficient techniques to get rid of Varroa, it's gassing them. So you get rid of them because it's not the dollar sign to actually get that colony back to healthy could be more expensive. So you don't want to have something like that. You want to make sure your colonies are healthy, productive, and overwintering well. Now, that was unhealthy. If you have a dead hive or if you have a pathogen that you have to burn all the equipment because you have a pathogen that you can reuse that equipment, then we're talking about more dollar signs there. That's the equipment that you lose, that's the colony that you lose, loss of honey production, pollination service, and labor, because you need labor to do all that. So it's very expensive. So you want to make sure your colonies are healthy. So now I'll talk about the options that we'll be providing with this service. There will be different options and they will have different costs, so we can serve all of you better, so according to what you want, kind of thing. So option 1 will be kind of the full spectrum that I mentioned before, so it'll be three different viruses, monitoring, collecting samples and monitoring for 3 different viruses, AFB and EFB, Varroa, and Nosema. And here, if you are AFB positive, we'll also do the resistance test to see if your colony is oxytact resistant. And also, I did not mention here because it's uncertain, but if you do have enough varroa, like if your varroa levels are high, we can also do a varroa resistance test. But that will depend on your varroa level. So that's why it's not included here, because it depends whether your varroa levels are high or not. Option 2, it's basically the same as option 1, but without the viruses. And option 3 is just varroa and nosema. The price for these options will include everything. So the laboratory test to test for these, the one-on-one meeting with beekeeper, and I will talk about this in my next slide, what that means. Labor, shipping. So there's a lot involved. It's not cheap. The National Health Survey, it's a grant that the NBDC, CHC, and the provinces work together to make these services free for you. It's a survey, but it's not cheap. So you never saw the dollar how much that actually costs. So it's very expensive. So this is not how much you will pay, but this is how much it costs. So this is $600 would be to do that for each yard. Okay, for each yard that you test, that's how much it would cost. For option 2 would be about $500, and option 3 that's about $400. Okay, but the tech transfer program has a grant. We also applied for a grant through the government, and the Alberta Beekeepers Commission has also matched a portion of that grant. And some of that money in that grant will go towards the colony health monitoring service. So that will make the program, the service a little bit cheaper for you. So instead of $600 for option 1, it would cost you $395 for each yard that you test. So this is per yard cost. Option 2 will be $285, and option 3 will be $145. So these will have to cap the number of beekeepers as well for this service, because we right now I'm just one. The program is just myself. We'll be hiring more people to help in the summer, but because it's also the first year, I kind of have to be careful how many people I hire. I have to make sure they have enough work to do. So we'll cap to 70 beekeepers, 70. And all beekeepers, all these 70 beekeepers can test for 3 yards. So it's 70 beekeepers, 3 yards per beekeeper. And you have to sign up by March 5th. Okay, so because the grant that we applied, the Alberta Beekeepers Commission matched a portion of that grant, the commercial beekeepers. What I'm doing is the commercial beekeepers have until March 5th to sign up. And the first round will accept application by commercial beekeepers. After March 5th, we'll open to all beekeepers. So if we don't have the 70 beekeepers by March 5th, all beekeepers can apply, small or big, you can apply for this service. Even if you just have 1 yard, it's fine. It'll be 1 yard for that one beekeeper. But after March 5th, all beekeepers can apply, but before, only commercial beekeepers. Again, you will sign up for that service in the Tech Transfer Program webpage. There will be a link for the Integrated Hive Management, and that's where you will register. Once again, it's not the page is not there yet, but we'll be hopefully launching very soon. So I talked about the one-on-one meeting with the beekeeper, and that is this middle here, this summer. So I talked about education, monitoring, and I also talked about the disease, pest, and evaluation, and I skipped the number 3 and 4 in the summer. So 3 is prevention, which is your best management practices to prevent that disease for you to have in your colony. And 4, intervention, that's your IPM strategy, so your chemical intervention or cultural practices to treat for that disease that you may have. And this is where that one-on-one meeting will happen, is to address those 2 points. So I want to collect management data from the beekeepers that participate in this service to evaluate those management practices. And hopefully these data will help us understand how these different management practices correlate or are associated with some of these diseases. Now keep in mind that when you survey 100 beekeepers, you may get 101 different management practices. So, of course, this is the goal. We may not find a trend, we may not find any association, but even if we don't find anything, it would be good for the beekeeper just to have that data as well for him or herself, to understand, have that data in her or his record on this is how I did this year, and these were my levels. My interest is a little bit different. Of course, my interest is to try to find an association on what do you do with what you have in a group kind of setting, a huge data set. But we may not have that if we have 101 management practices in 100 beekeepers. But that's my interest on this. But even if he doesn't pan out, at least the beekeeper will have that record for him or her, and that is very, very important. At the end, when we finish the monitoring, the evaluation, and all the management practices, we will report that to the beekeeper, and that will help the beekeeper decide at the end of the year, was it good, was not good, do I have to adjust my plan, do I have to change next year. Now, one thing that I just noticed I didn't mention is that when we collect these samples, we'll not wait until the end of the year to tell you what you have. We will report to you very soon what your levels are. The varroa levels, for example, we'll do it in the field, and we'll report to you right away, at least for the varroa levels, this is what you have. And we'll also take the sample to the lab and do another more standardized varroa wash in the lab and report to you again on that same level. But at least for the varroa, we'll have that level right away. And for nosema, we're working with a 2-week at least timeline that will give you those levels for nosema. For viruses, it may take you a little longer, but you will not wait until the end of the year to know what your levels in the spring were. So just keep that in mind. So just kind of to wrap up, these will for the colony health monitoring, it will be an early spring and fall disease pest sampling and diagnosis. We want to do before mite site treatment, but we may not have to be. And then the one-on-one meeting with the beekeeper to collect that management data. So kind of just summarized for today what the tech transfer program will be for next year, for this year, 2020. For the applied research, that's what we are planning to do for applied research for this next year, is the mass storage of queens. In the disease pest management kind of section is the integrated hive management program. And for training, we have the IPM on-site, but I'm also planning to do a couple additional trainings in the future. It may not happen this year, but having an online course, it would be the IPM version, but an online course that people can take and have a certificate at the end. Hey, I took this course for IPM training. And also a queen breeding / rearing training, hands-on, that you can learn how to graft, all the steps into queen rearing. So these two, it's a plan, it may not happen for this year, but I will definitely work on those two for the following year. Okay, thank you. If you have any questions.